Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Night of the Living Dead. Now, Night of the Living Dead came out in 1968, and the film is co-written and directed by George A. Romero. Now, Night of the Living Dead was such a revolutionary horror film for its time. Like, the film came out the same year as Rosemary's Baby, and I would say both this and Rosemary's Baby are probably the two most revolutionary horror films to come out in the late 60s. Like, they're the horror films which really started to change horror at that time. Now, I don't think Night of the Living Dead was quite as revolutionary as horror films like The Exorcist and The Last House on the Left and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre would be later on, but this was one of the horror films which really did change horror at the time. And Night of the Living Dead also revolutionized the zombie genre. Now, a zombie is a dead body that has come back to life, and there have been movies about dead people coming back to life for as long as there have been movies, so even at this time, zombie films were not a new thing. Like, early examples of the zombie genre would be films like White Zombie and I Walked with a Zombie and King of the Zombies, and even Frankenstein can kind of count as a zombie film as well, because when you think about it, the Frankenstein monster is kind of a zombie. I mean, he is a reanimated corpse, so zombie films have existed long before this film came out. But this is the first zombie film to introduce the concept that if you get bitten by a zombie, you become a zombie. That concept was made up for this movie, and pretty much every zombie movie that has come after this has more or less ripped that concept off. Basically, this is the first plague zombie movie. This is the first zombie movie where, once again, if you get bitten by a zombie, you become a zombie. And if it wasn't for this movie, movies like The Return of the Living Dead or Lucio Fulci's Zombie would not exist. Even Resident Evil and The Walking Dead also would not exist if it wasn't for this movie. Like, this film really did redefine the entire zombie genre. And this really was the first zombie apocalypse movie, but like, you have stuff like The Walking Dead and World War Z, and once again, none of that would exist if it wasn't for this movie. Now, Night of the Living Dead was partly inspired by the Richard Matheson novel, I Am Legend. Now, the novel I Am Legend was actually about vampires taking over the Earth, and it followed this character named Robert Neville, who was the last human survivor of this vampire apocalypse. So George Romero, he did take some inspiration from I Am Legend, only instead of vampires taking over the Earth, it's zombies taking over the Earth, and instead of one main character, it's 7 main characters. But if you've read I Am Legend, and if you see this movie, I mean, the two stories, when you really look at it, are barely similar, but you can see where Romero took some of the inspiration, though. And especially if you see the Vincent Price film, The Last Man on Earth, which was a direct adaptation of I Am Legend, even if you see that film, you could tell where George Romero may have taken a lot of his inspiration from I Am Legend. Now, the plot of Night of the Living Dead is, it's about this phenomenon that's happening where the bodies of the recently dead are coming back to life and attacking people and actually eating people, and anybody who is killed by one of these zombies would also come back from the dead as a zombie, and you realize that this is happening all over the world, and this is spreading like a plague throughout the entire planet. But even though this is happening all over the world, the movie is set in one small location, and it follows a group of 7 people people who are barricading themselves in this old farmhouse to keep the zombies out. And the movie is set over the course of one night, but throughout the night these 7 people start turning on each other, and you realize that they're their own worst enemies. And really the main point of this movie is that people are the real monsters. Like, these 7 main characters spend so much time in the movie fighting each other that they lose sight of the real goal, which is protecting themselves from the zombies, and ultimately that's their downfall. Now, a lot of the film focuses on the conflicts between the character of Ben, who is arguably the protagonist of the movie, and the character of Harry Cooper, who is arguably the antagonist. Now, I do think the character of Ben really is the character who you root for the most, and you sympathize with the most, and the character of Harry Cooper is a pretty unlikable character. Like, he's an asshole, but at the same time, though, if you look at it from Harry's point of view, you do kind of see his point, because he is trying to protect his daughter, and I feel like the movie does a good job at showing you the point of view of both the protagonist and the antagonist, and you realize that both characters have good points, but ultimately it's both characters' refusal to see the other's point of view which is the ultimate problem. Now, Night of the Living Dead was not just revolutionary in terms of horror films, but I would say in terms of movies in general, because this was one of the first movies to have a black main character. Now, there were movies before this that had black main characters, like To Sir with Love and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, but this was one of the first movies to feature a black man as the lead character. And you gotta realize, this was 1968. The civil rights movement was going on at this time, so for the time that was revolutionary. Now, Night of the Living Dead is actually a very political movie. The film really is kind of a political satire on everything that was going on in the 1960s, because the 1960s was a very turbulent time in American history. Like, you had the Vietnam War, there was the civil rights movement, and there was a lot of conflicts going on in America during this time, and you could even look at the conflicts between the main characters in this movie as being a metaphor for the conflicts that were actually going on in America. And also, this film has a lot of allegories to racism, especially the end of the movie, which, even though the film's almost 50 years old, in case there's somebody watching this review who has not seen this movie, I don't want to give away the ending, but if you've seen this movie, you could definitely see where the ending was a definite allegory for racism. And also, the 60s was a very revolutionary time. A lot was changing in the 1960s, and Romero has actually said that one of the things he was trying to go for with this movie was he wanted to make a movie about a new generation literally devouring the old generation. So in this film, there's a lot of political and social commentary and satire on everything that was going on in the 1960s. So not only is Night of the Living Dead a great horror film, but it's also a great political satire as well. But Night of the Living Dead is such a classic movie. I love this movie to death. Like, I've seen this movie God knows how many times, and it is just such a great movie. And I do feel like this is one of those movies that, even if you don't like this movie, you do have to respect this movie, because once again, the zombie genre as we know it now would not exist if it wasn't for this movie. This wasn't the first zombie movie, but this film really did revolutionize zombie films. Like, once again, things like Resident Evil and The Walking Dead would not exist if it wasn't for this movie. Now, shortly after Night of the Living Dead came out, the movie actually fell into the public domain, so now the film is in the public domain, so since it's in the public domain, you could just easily watch this movie online, like you could watch it on YouTube, just type in Night of the Living Dead full movie, and that should take you to the whole movie, so you can watch it online. Now, I actually have Night of the Living Dead on a couple of these, like, public domain box sets. Like, I have it on this DVD here called Great Scary Movies, where it also comes with the Roger Corman film The Terror and the original House on Haunted Hill. I also have the movie on this box set here called 15 Horror Films. I also have it on this box set here. I also have it on this box set and this box set and this box set as well. Once again, since the movie's in the public domain, you can find the movie on almost any of these public domain box sets. Now, because this movie is in the public domain, almost anybody could re-edit this movie and release their own version on DVD, and in recent years there was a colorized version of this movie, which was released on DVD a couple of years ago. My aunt actually has this movie on DVD, and whoever put this DVD out also re-edited the movie with new music and added new scenes into the movie. So you could do almost anything with this movie since it's in the public domain, but just because you can, doesn't mean you should. But yeah, this movie, it was so revolutionary and so influential. It basically created plague zombie movies, and it also created the zombie apocalypse genre. Now, in 1990, there was a remake of this movie, which was directed by Tom Savini, and George Romero actually did write the screenplay for the remake. Now, I actually really do like the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead. There's also another remake of this movie, which came out a few years ago with Sid Haig in it. I actually have that one on DVD, but I've never watched it, and I think that one also had a sequel made to it. And George Romero did a series of sequels to this movie. In 1978, Romero made the film Dawn of the Dead, and in 1985 you had Day of the Dead, and then in 2005 you had the film Land of the Dead. After Land of the Dead, Romero made the film Diary of the Dead and its sequel Survival of the Dead. Now, I actually don't consider Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead to officially be part of Romero's Dead series. Like, I consider those two to be more of a retcon of the series, or a reboot, if you will. So I am going to be reviewing the other Night of the Living Dead films, like Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and Land of the Dead, but I'm not going to be reviewing Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead, because I don't officially count those films as being part of this series. But yeah, that was my review on Night of the Living Dead, and bye.